this is the first episode, hopefully, of a lot of interviews. So this is episode 1. I interviewed Chris Cowden. He just directed a film called Moments in Spacetime, starring Rhys-Davies and Srisuwan. I'm probably mispronouncing both their names, so feel free to, bash me in my comment section.
Moments in Spacetime is about Macy, a Thai immigrant adopted into a North American family who must look after her dementia-suffering grandfather, but she searches for the truth about her past.
And if you're a film student or a film enthusiast or someone who's just trying to get into the game, listen to this interview. He gives a lot of practical advice. Take it from someone who's actually made multiple feature films. I wish I could have asked him a million more questions, and hopefully if I interview him again, I'll get to those. So enjoy.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
How are you doing, Chris?
Good. How about you, man?
I'm good. Basically my first question is like super basic, but just like what and possibly like who made you want to get into filmmaking?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say I always like storytelling. Like I'd always write short stories as a kid, and I had a teacher that was really great around grade, probably when I was around 11 years old, and she would let us write these stories, and we could read them to the class, and it kind of turned into almost like stand-up comedy, And so I really enjoyed doing that. And then one day, also when I was 11, I was watching a movie, and this was back in the days where you rent something on the weekend. It was kind of like a big deal. And I remember watching this movie, and I just thought, man, I love, movies. I should make movies. I would love to do this. And pretty much from that day on, I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker. That was kind of my dream. Yeah, when I was about 11 and a half.
Do you remember what the movie was?
Yeah, you know what? It was actually Ridley Scott's Thelma and Louise, which is a kind of an odd choice. And I haven't watched it since then, but when you're a kid and you get to watch like a PG-13 movie or a rated R movie, it's like, it was like a big deal, So, and I just remember these two characters driving through the desert, and I had no idea where the story was going, and I felt like I was part of the adventure, and I thought this is really neat. I'd like to create this kind of experience for other people. Sure, yeah. I've gone through every, every phase imaginable. Like, I used to make comedies, and then I made like horror movies, and then I was in like a kung fu phase for a while because I'm a huge Jackie Chan fan, and I got into Hong Kong action movies and 1970s exploitation movies, and so yeah, I would say if you were to go through and watch every film I've ever made, you'd see all these kind of, arcs and pitfalls and detours. But yeah, I think, and they all kind of shape, your vision along the way. I think you get something out of each one of them.
I had to ask about this because like, I looked at your IMDb profile and I found Max Caliber PI.
Take Logan round the corner and shoot him.
No, not without my daughter.
Brother. I'm your brother.
And so was
sure.
the exploitation and like 80s movies, like especially like a big influence on that?
Absolutely, yeah. So like I grew up watching like the big mainstream adventure movies from the 80s and the 90s. Like the first film I ever saw was E.T. And so I just kind of went from there, watching things that I enjoyed, and then after I was a kid and I was in university, I did my bachelor's degree in Hawaii, and then I revisited these movies. And I don't know if you've gone back and revisited the movies from your childhood, but you always have, you look at it from a different lens. And then I noticed very quickly, the 80s and I would say like early 90s movies, there is a certain exploitation quality to all of them, that especially if you look at like the action movies and the TV shows like Magnum PI and Miami Vice. So I started revisiting all these, and I just found so many funny quirks in all of them. And I kind of had this idea to make this short film of Max Caliber Hawaii PI, where I'd kind of combine them all, and it would be kind of a tribute, like a kind of like a love letter to those 80s films, but also also a satire, right? And so we ended up winning this contest called MTV Best Filmmaker on Campus, and then we kind of extended that into a full-length movie, which is really great because when I made that movie and did a premiere with it, we managed to raise over $20,000 for charity, and I got to start a scholarship fund for Métis students in Alberta, Canada, which is where I'm from. I'm a Métis filmmaker. And so it's just, a great opportunity for me to give back, and that scholarship still lives on today every year. I didn't know, especially in those early days when I would make, my early films, which didn't have much of a budget. I just went on pure enthusiasm, and I would say, hey, I'm making this movie, and I would pitch it and kind of share that energy, and people would either want to be a part of it or they wouldn't. But most of the time they would, I found. And you can pay people to be in a movie or to work on it. And of course, when you're making like a real big budget movie, absolutely you should do that. But if you're just starting out and making a movie for fun, I would say just get like-minded people that want to participate in it, because if someone's excited about the project, they will always go that extra mile, more so than someone that you're paying an hourly wage to work on it.
We just watched like Moments in Spacetime.
Oh, great. Yeah. Awesome.
Did John Rhys-Davies say anything about working with Spielberg or Jackson or anything?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, well, like in private conversations or when we, eat lunch or something like that. And I got to spend some time with him both before and after the shoot. So it was very interesting because he talked about, Spielberg being very good with directing actors and having a real vision and this vocabulary just ready to go. But then another thing he said with Peter Jackson that he found so interesting was he had a huge respect for Peter Jackson because he had created an entire industry from almost nothing in New Zealand. Like he couldn't believe, it really is the special effects company, everything there. He said there was almost nothing there before, and Peter created this whole industry for people to live in and work in and, have a life, in. And so he had a lot of respect for Jackson for doing that. The one thing that was like a real vote of confidence, and this obviously was a budgeted film, much different than my early films, right? Was I had already talked to John before making the film, and I talked to his agent, and they both really loved the script and the character, and John had a lot of personal experiences with loved ones that had dementia in his own life.
When you were mining for that character, did you have anyone with dementia in your life?
Well, I do, of course, yes. My darling old first wife, she was 13 years older than me, and she would say odd things like, Johnny, one of these days you're going to lock me up and throw away the key. And I won't worry too much as long as I've got a room with some sort of view. When that time came, I did make sure that there was a view, but by then, I don't think she was seeing anything.
So it was kind of near and dear to his heart, and he knew where I was coming from, in directing it. And, he understood the script. I mean, sometimes you give a script to someone and they just don't get it, right? So I was pretty comfortable going in knowing that. And the other thing is this was my first film of that size and that budget. So I had so many other things to worry about, to be perfectly honest. My favorite part of that whole film was just, working with him and Patty Srisuwan in their scenes, and Sam Gittins was great too. Just working with the actors was a blast. That was like the most peaceful part of the whole process for me. And it's really interesting making a movie with Patty because she's an actor, and I don't know if people always get this opportunity, but a lot of the time she'll create this idea for a character, and then I have all these different ideas for a story, and then we'll kind of create that character and that world, and I'll wrap a story that I have around it. So in this particular case, one of the first inspirations was someone we knew had adopted a child and they couldn't have kids. And then so they adopted this child, and about 2 years after adopting the kid, they had their own child miraculously. And then I saw them, after the kids, were a couple of years older, and I could see it was very clear that the parents seemed to love the biological child more than the adopted child, even though they'd been with the adopted child longer. And I never really thought of that dynamic. And I thought it was such a strange and interesting and maybe kind of, melancholy situation. And then we decided to put this character, the Macy character, as this girl who's kind of, spent part of her childhood in Thailand, and then the other part of her young adult life in North America. And so she's kind of conflicted, and she's in this exact same situation. And so we thought that was kind of our starting off point, you know, of where we wanted to take it. And then we had all these other ideas for scenes and this kind of storyline with this grandfather that suffered from dementia. And that was directly taken out of my own life with my own grandfather, who actually, he died the week that I finished writing the screenplay. And so that's why at the end of the end credits, I kind of dedicate, you know, the film to him, because he was a big inspiration. And so it was neat. And then I just feel like if you're sharing something from yourself, other people are going to be able to feel something. Like, so in John's case, when he read the script, you know, it resonated with him because he'd had a similar experience with his wife. You know, Patty's experiences as an immigrant, you know, other people that watched the film that were immigrants, or maybe it had some sort of, you know, prejudice in their own life of some sort, you know, could relate to that. So that's something I've learned over the years. And I think that my films kind of get a little more serious and serious as time goes on, is that if you actually share something about yourself, it seems like people might not like it, but that's what people like the most at the end of the day, I think.
My favorite, I just, like, this isn't necessarily a question, but I just want to
Yeah, please.
My favorite, I had two favorite parts.
Okay.
The one was the one shot kind of take. And it's cool because I like that it wasn't necessarily like, look, we're doing a one shot. It just was kind of something you start to notice. The no ketchup scene.
Oh,
with,
yeah.
With Patty.
Yeah, sure.
That, go ahead, sorry.
No, yeah. Well, that's an interesting one to bring up. So people don't realize it until they're about halfway through that, oh, this is a long take, which makes it interesting, right? I think it's about 5 minutes and 20 seconds or something around there by the end. And I like it because you just see the tension slowly building, slowly rising. Another interesting thing about that too, depending on what region you watch the film in, that scene may or may not be in it, right? So if you get a film to distribution, that's another thing. They may want some scenes cut. You know, those are things directors have to deal with. And it was interesting when we did a test screening with the first cut of the film, or one of the early cuts. And we had, you know, probably about 100 people out, and, you know, had them fill out forms to get some perspective. And the first cut of the movie was really long. It was like 2.5 hours long, about 40 minutes longer than what it was. And so we, you know, when we had that scene, and then it came down to the question of, well, do we need the scene? Do we not need the scene? And then some people didn't like it, but then we'd go through the papers, and then other people would say that was their favorite scene in the movie. So it's interesting when you ask these kind of questions. I find a lot of the time the filmmaker's gut is going to be right, because you know what's right for your film. And when you go and you ask a lot of people, a lot of the time it ends up being 50-50. So yeah, some people loved that scene. Maybe some people didn't, I don't know. But it was one, I would say, anyone that had experienced something similar to the character Macy did in the film, they really, you know, got something out of that scene. And so I've seen this sort of thing happen a couple times, just, you know, random, where I'm at a restaurant, or I don't know, you're at a mall or something, and you see someone lose it. And every time it happens, I always wonder, what's the backstory? Like, what happened before this? And so that was like kind of one of the first scenes, was I wanted this freak out, and then I wanted to go back from there and show everything leading up to this moment. And the thing that I think is so neat about that part is something very dramatic happens a couple scenes before this, and it doesn't hit the character. Like in real life, sometimes we're in shock, and it doesn't hit you till moments later. And so the people, everyone there in the restaurant doesn't know what happened. The only person who knows what happened is Macy, right? And so it finally catches up with her, and we have this kind of cathartic release, and only Macy and the audience are in on what happened. So they're really the only ones that can have sympathy for her in the situation.
Yeah, it reminded me of Falling Down.
Sure. Yeah, great example.
Oh, yeah, that's a very Joel Schumacher. People harp on him because of Batman and Robin.
Just because of Batman, his other films are great. A lot.
Yeah, curious about, like, how do you secure financing for the film, and also what were the biggest lessons you learned out of just like from development and writing and shooting and post production?
Okay, sure. Yeah, well, let's start with financing. That's one of the trickiest things, and I would say there's no clear-cut answer on it. I think every director ever that's managed to make a movie that makes it to festival or distribution or gets out into the world as like a totally different story. My advice would be you have to be willing to put at least a third of your own money into the project if you want anyone to believe in it. You might get about a third back from grants. I live in Canada, and there's a fair amount of grants, and there's telefilm and provincial grants, but a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't even realize this, at first, that maybe you're an Indigenous filmmaker, then look into Indigenous filmmaking grants. If you're a student, there's student film grants. There's student film festivals. Whatever, look at your story. It's going to be different for every movie, and see, who knows, maybe you have a female cinematographer and there's a grant out there that's trying to get, new voices in the cinematography world out there. You have to look for all of these things. And I would say if you look hard enough, you're going to find some grants, some money, some funding, and you're probably going to have to put some of your own money in, especially with a lot of grants. They want to see that, you have some skin in the game, right? And then I would say, the other third, I don't know, maybe you need to convince someone, that this is a worthy investment. Some people will go, I haven't really done this, but I know that some people will go and find producers and then they get a producer credit, but really they want to experience, what filmmaking's like and take a risk. And I would say, be careful if you're going to promise someone that they're going to get their money back. You had better have a business plan ready for that. Because some people go into things naively. But I would say, yeah, look for grants, put some of your own money in, and just get people excited about the film. The other thing I would say too is, if you're not willing to put your money in, then you shouldn't be willing to go and put your uncle's money in or your parents' money in. It really, you will look at the filmmaking process very differently when it's your money, and you will know what's important to pay for and what isn't. I think that in itself is a good lesson for any filmmaker to go through, even if they only have to do it once.
Yeah, how long did you guys shoot for?
Yeah, it was probably around a 21-day shoot.
Okay, so yeah, like 2 weeks and some more, like 5 days.
Yeah, like not counting days off and that sort of thing. So 21 days of full shooting, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Which is pretty fast considering the length, actually. Yeah, it was intense.
How many pages a day? It probably depends on locations and everything in between, but how many pages a day would you shoot?
I would have to go back and look through. Some days, depending on the scene, it might be only a couple, but I know there was one day where we managed to get 8 pages. I don't know how we did that. But other days, it depends on the scene. And that's the other thing, like you'll work with your assistant director and you're making your schedules, figure out which scenes you need some time to practice in, to play with, to try different things. The more prep you have done, the smoother it's going to go, but there's always hiccups, and every once in a while you get lucky and something goes really smooth and you finish early. That doesn't happen often, but it happens once in a while. One thing, the film appears to be on a longer focal length a lot of the time, because with the anamorphic lenses we were limited to, I think our widest lens was a 35 millimeter, so which has a great look, a gorgeous look, but on just a technical note, it's quite difficult to shoot, especially if you're in shooting on a location that you can only go so far back till you hit a wall, right? So there's a lot of disadvantages to shooting with a 35 being your widest focal length. And I would say every time you make these decisions, there's a plus. There's a plus and a negative to everything you do, and I would say there were certainly some scenes where we were at a disadvantage with those particular focal lengths, but other times where obviously, with the anamorphic and just it looks gorgeous, right? And the way it captures the light. So I would say I try to set up for every film that I do like a couple, I will call them like creative rules. That I say I have to work within these rules in this film, because then I'll grow from it. So in this particular case, like some people will say, well, you could get one spherical, and if you're shooting a 4K, you could crop it afterwards, and then you could get those wide shots, but it wouldn't have the same look. And yeah, you could do that. It would kind of change the look, but at the same time, I said I want to learn anamorphic, so I put myself in that creative box and said I have to shoot the whole movie on these. I think it was 4 lenses, and go from there. And I recommend that anyone, with any art form, that's something I didn't understand at first when I started making films, and I think that's something that I've benefited from every time I made one movie that was a silent film, and you weren't allowed to have any talking in it, right? And I think it really changes the way that you tell a story if you have to do it that way, right? I would say to young filmmakers, the first thing is just go out and make a film. There is no right time. There's never going to be a right time to make a movie. And sometimes I'll talk to people that say, and I mean this literally, I've talked to people that have told me, hey, Chris, I know you make films. I've got an idea. You should make it. And I say, well, why don't you make it? That's great, but make your film. And they say, well, I want to wait for this and I want to wait for this. And I've talked to them 5 years later and they still haven't made the film. And I don't have the schedule. I don't have a cinematographer. Just go and make it, because your first film or your first couple films might not be masterpieces. That's fine. Make some mistakes or learn, grow, experiment before you put $1 million on the line. I would say make as many films as you can before you get to that situation, or you start investing, your own money and other people's money into it. I think, Stanley Kubrick said, if you want to learn filmmaking, go out and make a film. And I think that's absolutely right.
You know what's funny? I'm doing the sync clap, but there's no like the mic is it's in the camera. It's a Rode mic plugged into